So PETA spent Super Bowl Sunday critiquing the commercials, calling out those that promoted the consumption of meat by companies like Uber Eats, and praising those that chose to forego animal actors like this one by Mountain Dew. On Twitter, PETA wrote, Mountain Dew Super Bowl ad gets a round of applause for using CGI seals and orcas instead of exploiting real animals, plus the faux fur look was a win. Personally, I thought that commercial was one of the creepiest ones I've ever seen, and I don't understand why PETA is now spending their time hot on the cause of putting animal actors out of work with AI. Stunning and brave. Fortunately for animals, another organization, the White Coat Waste Project, has been hot on the trail of the biggest threat animals actually face in the U.S., which is the federal government.
If Dr. Anthony Fauci thought Rand Paul was mad at him, wait until the animal activists see this. A new report shows that under Fauci's direction, the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Disease funded painful and deadly experiments on dogs to the tune of more than $400,000. According to the White Coat Waste Project, researchers used biting flies to infect dozens of healthy beagles with parasites to test an experimental drug. Records show the dogs endured months of pain, and once researchers were done with them, they were killed.
The organization has been obtaining records via Freedom of Information Acts and acting as a whistleblower on this topic for years, and last week, Congress held a hearing to examine their findings, which has now gone absolutely viral online, with Elon Musk and Doge now setting their sights on the matter too. So here's what you need to know. First, I'm Hannah Cox. Welcome to my channel where I bring you my politically homeless takes on politics and culture. If you enjoy this show, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel while you're at it. I release shows every weekday at 7 p.m., so make sure you don't miss a single one by hitting that notification bell to get reminders. And if you're listening on audio, you can head over to Spotify or Apple and rate and review the show. So I've been working alongside the White Coat Waste Project for years now. I became a fellow for them after I started reporting on some of the FOIAs they were releasing. We got in touch. I had done a lot of pro-life work around repealing the death penalty and standing up for human rights. Obviously, that flows very naturally into animal rights activism. And I was so excited to find them because, as I think most people can agree, the other animal welfare organizations are kind of garbage. I'm not interested in policing what people eat. I'm not going to run out and throw blood on people if they choose to wear fur. I will always work to ensure that when we do have farming techniques, that they are ethical and humane for animals. I personally choose to forgo wearing real fur. But really, if you want to fight for animal rights, if you truly want to make a dent, these things are chump change. They are minor parts of the conversation, because the reality is the US government is the top funder in the world of animal torture. So if you're not talking about that and those dollars, you're really never going to make a dent on what's truly happening to animals in this country. And because so many of the traditional animal welfare organizations have been more left-wing, they have by nature been very hesitant to call out big government or even worked to defend big government and the people working within it. Now, the White Coat Waste Project has been working to expose these grants for years, but they were kind of flying under the radar until COVID happened, where they ended up having the smoking gun by happenstance that proved the NIH was funding the Wuhan lab through a pass-through organization called Eco Health Alliance. And they just happened to have that information because they knew that the US government was sending grants to torture kittens in these labs and was trying to trace them down. And then they stumbled upon what became the biggest story of the century. But as they were trying to expose that information, along with other details they had come across pertaining to Fauci and his programs that tortured beagles, they had an uphill battle because Democrats were running cover for Fauci, for the NIH, for the scientists that work within the government, and ultimately working to protect the ability for these people to use your dollars to hurt animals. We had a huge lift just trying to get this information in front of the American people for years. I was having to tiptoe around. I would get censored on almost every social media platform that there was. I couldn't talk about this on Facebook. I couldn't talk about it on YouTube. I certainly couldn't talk about it on TikTok. The mainstream media would not report on it. Fauci was lying to our actual congressional members under oath. Rand Paul was trying to get to the bottom of it. It was a David versus Goliath battle just to get this information in front of the American people, much less to start getting Congress to take action on it. So I say all that because it's really important to know just how much work has gone into leading up to this moment. Okay, but now that you have that foundation, let's turn our attention to the next smoking gun that the White Coat Waste Project is revealing, which was covered in depth at this hearing last week.
Senator Rand Paul's December 2024 Festivus report highlighted cruel taxpayer-funded cat experiments exposed by my organization. In one $10 million DARPA grant, cats have marbles shoved up their rectums and are electroshocked to make them defecate in constipation experiments. We've also recently identified over $240 million in NIH grants for transgender animal experiments, including $26 million in active funding. Some of these tests, as the chairwoman mentioned, examine the effects of party drugs on animals injected with testosterone and how hormones used for human gender transitions impact the size and shape of animals' genitals. How does this translate to helping the average American? Shockingly, 95% of this funding came from Dr. Fauci's NIAID. Speaking of Dr. Fauci, our group is perhaps best known for exposing his and USAID's funding for dangerous gain-of-function animal experiments at the Wuhan lab. We also uncovered his support for cruel beagle tests around the world. Taxpayer-funded animal tests may have caused COVID. Unfortunately, the government hasn't learned its lesson from what happened in Wuhan. Today, there are still 26 animal labs in China, including labs controlled by the Chinese Communist Party and tied to the military, approved to receive NIH funding. This isn't just a misuse of taxpayer dollars, but presents a national security threat. White Coat Waste recently obtained a contract funded by the NIH and DoD that's paying for 300 beagles a week to be restrained and injected with or force-fed experimental drugs in a Chinese lab. The reason they chose beagles like Nellie, Oliver, and Beasley, the contract states, and I quote, "Beagle dogs are docile, cute, and easy to domesticate, so it has been the best choice," end quote. Not because it's effective, but because it's easy. This issue extends beyond China. 344 animal labs in 52 foreign countries are approved currently to receive NIH funding. GAO audits prompted by White Coat Waste have found that NIH shipped billions to foreign animal labs with essentially no oversight, that the NIH has never visited a foreign animal lab in over 40 years of overseeing research, and that some foreign spending isn't even tracked. This is how some spending in Wuhan went undisclosed. And no surprise, Dr. Fauci's division of NIH is responsible for 95% of the foreign aid.
What I thought was most interesting about this hearing is that the Democrats did not push back. And yes, this is just one committee. Yes, they are currently in the minority, but I cannot tell you how much of a thorn in our side many Democrats have been on this issue leading up to this year. They have, in every single hearing, worked to downplay these reports, worked to try to discredit them, worked to try to protect the people who were on their team when they were exposed for participating in some of these grants. And even though White Coat Waste has had to fight an uphill battle, I want to be clear, they have still had more success than any other group. Over the past couple of years, they've gotten multiple labs defunded. They've ended the VA's cat testing program. They've shut down the pipeline for EcoHealth to get funding. They've rescued tons of animals, some of which you saw in that hearing committee room. So this hearing is really just the latest. This has been building for some time, but I did think it was quite remarkable that Democrats stayed silent and even lend their support to some of the Republicans who were really spearheading this effort. I noted that some other journalists picked up on this too. This report said the Democrats on the Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Government Innovation Subcommittee did not once step in to defend the newly unprotected retiree, referring to Fauci, as Democrats did at prior hearings, or argue the GOP was exaggerating his role in gruesome animal testing. They didn't even object to the multiple denunciations of so-called gender-affirming care, meaning hormonal and surgical procedures to make subjects resemble the opposite sex in the context of NIAID funding such experiments on mice, rats, and monkeys. So yeah, kudos to them, I guess, but also, I mean, pretty hard to come in and defend this. I thought it was crazy to defend the Wuhan funding. I thought it was crazy to defend the torture of beagles. But when you get into the fact that the government has been using millions and millions of taxpayer dollars to try to make animals transsexual, like, you would have to have a screw loose to get up in front of people and actually try to justify that. Just to run those numbers back one more time, because yes, you did hear him correctly. That was $10 million spent on transgender animal experiments, some through diversity, equity, and inclusion grants under the Biden administration. These people were so deeply unserious.
Coat Waste Project exposed more than $10 million in taxpayer funds that were spent creating transgender mice, rats, and monkeys. These DEI grants funded painful and deadly transgender experiments that forced lab animals to undergo invasive surgeries and hormone therapies at universities across the country. For example, the Biden-Harris administration spent $2.5 million taxpayer dollars, $2.5 million taxpayer dollars to study the fertility of transgender mice.
Let me know your thoughts, though, guys. I'm really curious to hear. Inevitably, when I talk about these things, there's always a few Democrats who drop in my comments to call me a conspiracy theorist, to say that I'll just believe anything, which is always hilarious because, like, we have the receipts. There is no conspiracy. We know beyond the shadow of a doubt that this happened. And you're in the age of information where you can use your little fingers and fact check it if you feel like there's any doubt and see that those receipts exist. So the fact that when you hear this kind of information, your knee jerk is to call the other person a conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, giving everybody a full understanding of just how little you've done to educate yourselves about the situation is, I don't know, it's embarrassing for you. You have to be pretty deep in an echo chamber at this point in American history to not know that some of these experiments have been happening, to not know about their role in the pandemic. And you really have to have a brain that is just so broken by tribalist thinking, like party alliance, that you would come in and continue to refuse to deal with this, to be upset by it, to call these people out. You're more concerned with trying to protect the image of these bureaucrats and the Democrats who protected them than you are with protecting animals and hopefully protecting the next pandemic, putting these mad scientists out of business. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comments. I'm sure we'll have some of those folks who drop in here. But for the rest of you, I'm really curious, is this something that you've been tracking? Have you reached out to your lawmaker about it? Are you as peeved as me? I really do love reading your thoughts and try to respond to as many as I can. So hop on down there and make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel while you're there. Not only are these programs disgusting and inhumane, not only are they a tremendous waste of taxpayer dollars that we need in a multitude of other sectors right now to actually improve the lives of Americans, but they are also super ineffective. There's no proof that we're actually getting any kinds of innovations or gains through this. And they continue to pose a tremendous public health risk.
What are the public health risks if we continue some of these outrageous animal studies?
We're flirting with disaster if we continue to fund dangerous virus research, both abroad, like in Colorado, where Fauci greenlit this bat lab. They're trying to import hundreds of bats from Asia to build a new lab in Colorado to do virus experiments with Ebola, Nipah, Lassa, deadly viruses for which there's no cure. It's just a matter of time before we have another pandemic on our hands if we let mad scientists run amok with our money.
What I think is really interesting about this is that not only is this obviously corrupt, you've got a whole bunch of bureaucrats and scientists who work for the government who are passing money back and forth and like getting everybody lots of grants, but you see a huge convergence of the government and these bureaucracies with higher education, which I have a huge beef with. I've made lots of content talking about the problems with higher education, with the funding problems. I think many of these schools should not even exist. I don't think they're creating value. I think they're putting Americans in debt for degrees that ultimately end up being worthless. I think they are working to indoctrinate people. Like, I really have it out for higher ed. But when you start digging into their funding structures and you realize just how much they are grifting off these specific kinds of grants, it will blow your mind. Their research programs are getting millions and millions of dollars that we have no accountability over. They don't have to actually produce new medicines, new innovations, right? This is just like carte blanche. They're getting use of these dollars. As this news report pointed out, many of these institutions are taking 25 to 40% off the top of these grants for indirect costs for a slush fund for running the school, instead of having to actually live off their endowments or the crazy amounts of money they're charging students to come there, or instead of having to actually, I don't know, balance their budgets and run a business as any other normal business would. They are getting millions in taxpayer dollars to float their corrupt operations. It's just absolutely rotten to the core. I, for the life of me, will never understand those who refuse to call a spade a spade. If your sports team mentality approach to politics has you out here spending nearly $500 billion on animal torture, you need to check yourself in somewhere. You need to change what you're doing. This is not the look. There is zero excuse to run cover for these people. And I promise you, you are not going to be on the right side of history if you try to. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel. Also, head over to the White Coat Waste Project and check out more of their work. Get involved. We need all hands on deck, and I'll see you tomorrow.